with them, okay?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
No, you all could do better than that. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Oh, you're out of breath and everything.
99 step, my run.
You've been walking for hours.
99 step.
You don't walk. Anyway, my classmate and football player and
culture activist.
and father of my godson asked me to say a few words. You and Blackbeard's hill. And I think the most important element on this hill is that there's two things. The Queen Mary statues, you see them here?
Which you're going to see here.
1878, the Fireburn, the Queens. Queen Mary, Queen Agnes, Queen Matilda. There was a fourth queen, 1878 on St. Croix, which really brings the end of slavery. Even though slavery had ended in 1848, they were tied to the plantation. Then we have above it is the Blackbeards. There's two castles, Blackbeards and Bluebeards. They were built. They weren't originally called Bluebeards and Blackbeards. Bluebeards is fake history. Blackbeards is real history. Bluebeards didn't exist. When they created the hotel in the 1940s, 50s, they named it Bluebeards for a pirate that really does not exist. Blackbeards does exist. And he was associated with this particular tower. But it was built by enslaved Africans, two towers with Fort Christian. Fort Christian was a slave castle built by African and indentured servants. There was the builder of the Fort Christian was a man by the name of Simon Lamar, who was an enslaved African. He was in charge of building the fort, and it was completed in 1680. So if you look, if you just turn around and look through that door, you'll understand why the tower was built where it is. So that's the view from inside that house. But if you get up on the upper layer, on the upper level, you're going to see a 360-degree view of St. Thomas. So these towers would signal for Christians if they saw foreign pirates or the enemy coming into the harbor of Charlotte Amalie. They had firing power by land. Fort Christian had firing power by sea. So it was named Skysburg. It was built by African labor. And they manned these towers. Then we have these structures. This structure was the first government house, so to speak. Because the governor who's associated with emancipation in 1848, Peter Van Schulten, he actually lived here. And it was called Crown House. So it later was sold. The Beretta family lived there. The Beretta Center, well, you don't know about the Beretta Center, but Miss Beretta, the photographer, her husband's family lived here in this house. And then most recently, ownership is the DeYoung family. And Robert and Donna DeYoung. And he was a local architect. Unfortunately, we lost him a few years ago. He was from Savannah. He purchased this property, he restored it, and he recently died, and they're now selling the property and the contents of the house. So he is probably the first black or African owner of this property in the history of it. There was a local builder named John Wright who had some properties associated on this hill. Paiwanski, for A.H. Reese, they lived there. This is the home of the Lutheran pastor for the St. Thomas Reformed Church. That was the parsonage for our Anglican Church, our saints. There's a couple other houses in here. The house on the right was owned by the Shelton Run. The Shelton Run, who health professional and a husband. Then we go down the steps, we have quarters B down below, government house, lieutenant governor's office, Lutheran parsonage. If you go to look at the fort, you could draw a line, so to speak, between the fort, the parsonage, and government house, right across from each other, because they didn't separate state from church. So that's a little history of this particular area. Always residential, continue to be residential. And as you go to the left, you have East Savannah. If you go to the right, you got the Street. And West Savannah, they were constructed, they started to build in the 1769, growing free black population, but it's enslaved population. Over the following years in these particular areas. So these communities were always mixed, different income, different class, people of color, Europeans, enslaved and free, and then of course slavery ended in 1848, and people of color had the right to buy property wherever they wanted, and they did so. We built many of these structures. The craftsmen, the masons, the carpenters, the furniture makers were all people of color that look like you and I. We also ran these households. The women were the cooks. They did the laundry, they took care of the children, they did the domestic work, they made their living the best way they could, and that was the whole history. The merchants usually lived up on the hill because they wanted to see the harbor, to get the breeze, like we're feeling right now. And Signal Hill, which is Hassel Island, which is really St. Thomas. It was disconnected in 1860. They have a lookout point on the very top, which was called Signal Hill. And they would put the balls with the different nations. If a German ship was coming in, you could look and you'll see the balls in a certain way. If it was an English ship, you'll see it a certain way. If it was a British ship, you'll see the balls in a different configuration. So the coal workers, which would make mostly women, lived in these areas, they would look and they would know that that's the ship they have to go on coal. They'll go over to Hassel Island, they go to West Indian Company, and they would fuel these ships. That's when they had steam engines. So that's a little of the history. If you have any questions, I'll take them. If not, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your tour.
I have two questions before.
Yes.
What was the slave market then? Emancipation got slave market.
Where was the slave market?
Yeah, no emancipation
Okay.
but there were any other?
The Africans were sold throughout the tongue of Charlotte Amalie. They were sold from private residences, but the official slave market would be the Emancipation Garden. That is, it was an open square. It was the port of arrival. It was at the foot of the castle. It was the foot of Fort Christian, the Danish, West Indian, and British companies, where the Grand Hotel is, an area for the holding of Africans.
The Grand Hotel?
The Grand Hotel, the site.
Oh, the site.
Yes, not the hotel itself.
Oh, okay.
It was comprised of several buildings and blocks. And you guys come on the side, some visitors come in, want to keep you safe. Yeah. So the fort, around the fort is really, I would say, the oldest. Some people say the overlooked slave market, but it was how are you, Paul? Watch yourself. Yeah. How are you? Happy New Year. The same. It was known as Catchment Square. It had a fire in 1804 that burned the area down, and then they created the square after the 1804 fire. But we don't have any indications that it was used for this.
Oh, but fire for myself.
This was established in 1764, 1765. It came up with this car. I've never seen a reference.
Because somebody came with us, I tell them, get it. Marcus Square, don't believe them. The same thing is everywhere, and then they say, yeah, not say, but we need to see, yeah, but we need
I was, and then you had Brandenburg, they had a company here, company that planned the Brandenburg beginning to review. Yes, they were saying Molo because they had owned Molo plantation here.
but it's part of the right there.
You know, across from the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
they go through the Islam.
It's possible, you know, that they go, like you say, they're Muslims, African,
But
different area.
if you look at the newspaper of the time, it gives you the list. They have the public action sale, and they give you the slab where they're being sold. Maybe that might be a project you might want to
That's what we do, we have this.
you know, but look at the record and see some of the places and actually go and make a map. These are places where Africans were sold in downtown Charlotte or in the town of Charlotte. It was called Tappers before it was Charlotte Avenue. It's Dutch because the Dutch were here, they were the planters, so we spoke a Dutch African Creole very similar to what they speak in Suriname and South Africa. It's a mixture of Dutch and African. It sounds like this. Oseibe. Oseibe means, how are you? Me fried donkey, I am fine, thank you. If I'm going to my house, I'll say Milolo a hoes. Hoes is house for Dutch. Milolo, I am going. If you're going to church, Milolo a keruk. Keruk is Dutch for church. So Oseibe, me fried donkey. Donkey is thank you in Dutch. So we mix the African and the Dutch words together, and this Creole language was created so much so that it was written. They had Bibles and books of instruction. So in the 1700s, Africans in these islands were literate. Many of them were literate. They spoke several languages. They wrote letters. They wrote correspondence. They bought property. They did a lot of things unlike what history tells us. So there's a lot to learn and a lot of discoveries to make. So I hope that give you a little background. And this, if you notice, these houses are like wood and masonry, because masonry, the fire codes require that you build masonry homes. But as you move out of the city, you know, wooden houses were also allowed. But then we had an earthquake in 1867. We had a hurricane, earthquake, and tidal wave that devastated St. Thomas. 3 disasters in 1 year. So people thought it was the end of the world, really. Here in these islands and around. When you had 3 disasters like that, like you guys say God speaking to you. So the 1867 destroyed Charlotte, Amalie, and a lot of, when they were rebuilding, they mixed the wood and the masonry, because how they did the construction, mortise and tenon of building could do like this instead of just a masonry falling apart. And so you find after the 1867 a mixture of building materials for the weather, for hurricane. This is our unusual roof, but most of the roofs are hip roofs like that, 4-sided. When the wind hits against it, it gives resistance, so they don't really tear off the roofs. That's why the houses in Savannah and the houses around, around the field and what we call up street still survive, because how they're built, they're constructed for hurricanes, they're constructed for earthquake. They give resistance to earthquake. They do like this, like your body The Americans came in with cut nail construction. You cut it, you hung a nail on it. So if there's a hurricane, it's going to fall apart. That's why them hurricane clip down ain't really the best one. A mortise and tenon joint is the best. And when you have an earthquake, at the wooden house is doing like this, the nail is going to move from the joint and the building would collapse. You know, so you find in India, in Asia, in other Africa, in other parts of the world, this mortise and tenon construction is very common and the best form of construction for furniture and construction.
One more question in regard. The whole Charlotte Amalie is a historic district?
Yeah, the whole of Charlotte Amalie is a national historic district. It's two districts. There's a local Charlotte Amalie Historic District and there's a national historic district. And the national meaning under the United States banner, under the National Park Service, the tongue of Charlotte Amalie, Christiansted, Fredericksted, Cruz Bay, St. John is designated tongues of importance. You got to remember, as small as St. Thomas was, it was a very important port. Not only during slavery, but for trade and commerce. Puerto Ricans came here to shop. People from the Eastern Caribbean came here to shop on what we know downtown Main Street. Those were merchant houses where they would bring the goods from all over the world, bring them to St. Thomas. And that's why St. Thomas, St. Croix was agriculture, and St. Thomas was the harbor. That's why you see the ships still come today. That's why you see the pleasure boats still come today, because it's one of the deepest harbors in this region and in the world. You could bring any class of ship into the harbor. I mean, you have to do dredging from time to time because of the topsoil going into the ocean. But we have one of the best maritime harbors in the world, and any seaman, anybody into shipping and boating will tell you this is an amazing harbor. So it made St. Thomas a very important port. The United States purchased it because of its proximity to the Panama Canal. World War I had just begun, 1916, and they wanted this as a military base. They established the Navy here. Then it went to civilian. That's why you have the statue of Rachel Francis. Yeah, Rachel Francis, the father of the Organic Act of 1936. Also with Lionel Roberts, who's considered one of the fathers and architects of the Organic Act of 1936. And we could go on and on and on. You have Edith Williams. She lived not too far from here. She was an educator. She was a sportswoman. She started the first lunch program out at Edith Williams School, which was known as Madison when she was going there. And then in the middle you have Jarvis. He's also from this area. The Jarvis Elementary School is down the steps. And these steps, there were no cars back then. But St. Thomas was so mountainous that to connect the hillside to the town, they built these street ramps. We call them street ramps. So you would walk down, even the French people going to the market and so forth. They would walk the donkeys down these steps, 99 steps. You got steps coming down there, they'll take you into Garden Street. You got another set of steps around the corner, they'll take you down by Lincoln School, Jarvis School. You go into Garden Street, those steps will take you up the hill, going up to Denmark Hill. And the like, you go into Savannah, there are a couple street steps, they'll take you up and down the hillside. So that's how people traverse back and forth.